This is the CNC Router Tips Podcast, episode 37. This is the CNC Router Tips Podcast, a show which answers one question from you, the listener, about CNC router tables, CNC software, hardware, web hosting, and business. I'll help you get started in your CNC hobby or business and help you cut through the confusion.
Today's episode is sponsored by TheMakersGuide.com. The Maker's Guide. Useful tools for makers.
Hi, everyone. I'm your host, Bill Griggs, and this is CNC Router Tips Podcast, a show that helps you learn how to use your CNC router table by answering your questions and helping you cut through the confusion. It's been a few weeks since our last episode was released, and there's been quite a bit going on this summer that has prevented me from releasing an episode. But we're back on track now, and sorry for any delay or inconvenience that this may have caused you. So, just moving forward, with a few things that I've been busy with. As you know, I've been working on converting a milling machine to CNC, and that project is complete now. And we have made our first few cuts, and things are going very well with that. It was a Grizzly G0704 machine. And now that I have that out of the way, it gives me time to concentrate on another project, and this one is CNC router related. I was very fortunate to receive from Eric Royer of Stepcraft one of his machines to look at, the Stepcraft 2 600 machine. I thought we'd spend some time in this episode and talk a little bit about that machine. Now, some of you may remember that we talked with Eric Royer in episode 18. So if you'd like to take a listen to that episode, you can go to cncroutertips.com/18. That's the numbers 1 and 8. And that will tell you all about how Eric raised $500,000 on a Kickstarter project to bring the Stepcraft machines into the U.S. So this is, it was really cool. In one of the conversations that I had with Eric after that episode, he indicated that he wanted me to take a look at one of his machines. And so right around January, he sent one to me. And I got the box, and it comes in a very large cardboard box that is roughly the same size as the finished machine. And it's not a heavy machine because it is a desktop machine, but it is sturdy. And, just a few facts about the Stepcraft 2 600 size. And it's called the 600 because that is the dimension of the long axis in millimeters. So the cutting, or the dimensions of this particular machine are in the X direction 16.5 inches. The Y is 23.5 inches. It's actually a little bit over each of these. I'm rounding down slightly. And the Z is 5.5 inches of travel. So if you used millimeters for those measurements, it's 420 millimeters by 600 millimeters by 140 millimeters. The way that these are designed, you can clamp a certain size piece of material to the bed of this. And in this case, the clamping area for the 600 is 17 by 26 3/4. Well, at any rate, those are the dimensions. So it's basically 432 millimeters by 680 millimeters. Okay, so this is basically a machine that will allow you to cut something, 2 foot by a foot and a half. Now, the Stepcraft machine, the 600, is a machine that is designed to use NEMA 17 size motors, which is smaller than the NEMA 23 motors that I use on my big machine. But they're well suited for this application and this size machine. Each of the axes has 6 points, ball bearing carriages. So there are 6 bearings on each axis. Very sturdy, very easy way that it distributes the load for these axes. Now, the type of bearing that they use in the wheels that these bearings ride in is kind of unique because this in a machine this size. Now, these are German-made machine, and a lot of the similar sized desktop machines that we see here in the U.S. have Delrin wheels, V-shaped wheels or flat wheels with ball bearings in them. But these have brass wheels with ball bearings in them, and they're very high quality, very nice, beefy feature. I'm really surprised that brass is a fairly expensive material to make components out of, and these Stepcraft machines have quite a bit of brass in them. So, that was pretty cool. And the other thing that they do is they match up each wheel with the axle that it's going on and machine them to specifically fit that axle. So they come in these little plastic bags for each set of wheels, and you want to keep those together. So that was kind of interesting. Now, these brass guide wheels are driven by lead screws, okay, instead of belts like most of the other small desktop machine. So these are an actual lead screw, okay, and that's usually a higher quality type decision to make because they're more expensive, because these are designed as linear motion screws. They're not all thread or anything like this. These are actually really lead screws. So these allow the machine to operate at about 118 inches per minute, or about 3,000 millimeters per minute, which is fairly respectable speed. There are many other features. Now, one thing that this machine has is it has 3 stepper motors instead of 4. So in order to drive the gantry back and forth, it uses 1 stepper motor on one side of the gantry and then a timing belt across the front of the machine. And that timing belt has an inspection cover over it, and it's very well put together so you can't get your fingers in there. But what it does with that is it locks the 2 sides of this gantry in step with it because it's a toothed belt. It has teeth in it, and so the one motor is able to move both sides of the gantry. And all these motors go together into a control electronics board that is mounted inside the bottom of the machine. So, everything, all the wiring on this machine, it's very nicely done. There are slots milled into the sides of the gantry to hide the wires. There's an included hose which holds the wires, kind of like a cable chain, only slightly different. And so all of the wiring that you would have on this machine is internal once you build it. And so it's a very neat setup, so you're not tripping over wires or anything. But the control electronics is basically a USB or serial cable. Now, what they sent me used a USB interface for the motion control, and that is the UC CNC I believe it's the UC100 USB controller. And that's meant to use CNC software. Now, with that particular controller, you could also use Mach 3 if you wanted to, and there are some people who are doing that. But I'm giving CNC a look because it's a new software, and I hadn't had any experience with it, so I want to see how it's doing. So I'm really looking forward to checking that out. Now, the top of the machine has a spoil board, which is very much like Formica, and it's not really meant to be cut into. It's meant to be a support surface so that you can put another spoiler board on top of that and clamp your part down to it. So that's an interesting feature. And there's also an option if you want to spend the extra money, you can get an aluminum T-slot table to go with this thing. But for now, the Formica is fine for what I'm going to do. So one of the things that I noticed right away when I got this machine was how heavy duty all the aluminum extrusions were. In fact, when I measured the extrusions, some of them were over an inch thick in some spots, and in most cases they were always over a quarter inch anywhere else. So they're really unique. They're especially made for this project. They're not something like an 80-20 or a maker slide or something like that has been adapted for this use. These were custom extruded for this machine, and they include the bearing surface that the wheels that we were talking about, the brass wheels, ride on. They're integrated right into these rails. So it's pretty neat way of doing things. So all of your linear motion needs are met with these extrusions, and so they're pretty hefty. That was the surprising part about the Stepcraft, because I am a little bit jaded in my expectation for CNC because I built my own, and because mine is a fairly large machine. So I thought the desktop machines in general were a little bit flimsy, but I don't get that feeling from this one. For instance, the Y-axis side plates that hold up the gantry are a half-inch thick, which is pretty substantial when you consider the ones I use on my 4-foot by 4-foot router are 3/4 of an inch. Okay, so for a small machine, that's pretty impressive. Some of the machines I've seen have 1/8 inch sides, and some of them have like polycarbonate sides and not aluminum at all. But these are anodized or powder coated, I believe. Not anodized. They're powder coated half-inch aluminum plates, and they're pretty stout. And the mount for the spindle is 3/4 inches thick. So, it's pretty hefty. So all in all, when I looked at the kit, I had to revise my position on just what makes a desktop machine, because this one is obviously pretty sturdy, and I was very impressed by that. Now, everything isn't all rainbows and cupcakes on the Stepcraft. There are a few things that I would probably change, and I'll talk about those more in another episode as I complete the build on this and get some cutting done with it. But all in all, I'm very impressed with what I see so far. It's obvious a lot of thought went into this design. It includes 3 instruction manuals that have like 3D CAD drawings of every single part. So as you're, getting ready to build it, there's a picture of the individual part at the front of the book. And then as you're doing the assemblies, there's, 3D exploded views and of each of the assemblies as you're going. So it's not difficult at all to find, what you're what it is that you're looking for and, where it goes and how it assembles. Now let's talk about the cost of the Stepcraft 2600. It goes for $16.99 for this size machine. And for that, you get the kit, which is which you assemble. You get a 110 volt AC power supply, and you get UC CNC control software and a parallel to USB interface, which is the UC100. You also get the USB cables, the instruction manuals, the operating instructions, and a first step manual. Just let me backtrack for a second and talk about the wiring that comes in this kit. All of the wires that hook up things like your limit switches, your stepper motors, and anywhere you need wiring in this thing are terminated with crimp-on connectors. So there's really no soldering involved in this whole thing. It's just a matter of finding the appropriate connector and plugging it in. So that's going to make things go pretty simply. I know I wanted to mention that, so I just thought I'd bring it up right now. As far as the computer that we're going to use for this, you have to provide that yourself. And, a Windows PC with a 1 gigahertz processor is probably good. Or you could use any of the Mac OS 10 with Windows emulator like Parallels or Boot Camp. So you can run this UC CNC software off of that. You can use any operating system from Windows XP on up. And it does support Windows 10 in 32 or 64-bit mode. So I'm going to run this from a laptop, but a desktop computer would work just fine with this because you're using the USB. As long as you've got a USB port, you should be good. And that's pretty much the basic description of this thing, except for the spindle. Stepcraft has a wide array of mounts that are available to allow you to mount different spindles to this machine. Anywhere from a Dremel tool on out the way up to their brushless DC spindle that they have. And now I intend to try and use a spindle that I have here that was made by Sears, which is similar to a rotozip tool. And if that works out, then I'll probably stick with it. Other than that, I might try one of the other spindles or a Bosch router or a DeWalt router, something along those lines. It would not do, I don't believe, to have a full-size handheld router on here, but any of the trim routers would be fine. Now, one thing that was unusual about Stepcraft, and it's the only machine in this size range that I'm aware of to offer an automatic tool changer option. Now, I didn't get that with mine, but it sure looks interesting, and it would allow you to automatically change between any of 10 tools. So you could run a tool path that had, for instance, a straight bit on one operation, a ball nose bit on another, maybe a drill or whatever. And the machine would go along and automatically pick up that bit, use it, then put it back and select the next bit in line. I haven't seen that in person, and I would love to, but it's not something that I plan to invest in at the moment. So it's just really cool to have that option, though, because I'm not aware of any other small desktop machine that has an automatic tool changer. Now, there was a lot of discussion of this tool changer in the private Facebook group, the hashtag CNC Router Tips Facebook group, talking about it. And many people were trying to determine which spindles it would work with. And at the moment, it's only designed to work with the Stepcraft spindle. So, that's something to consider. If you're into that, and, that's something that you think that you might use, then the automatic tool changer is about a $550 additional add-on option. And if that's something that you think you would use, there it is. And the $550 for an automatic tool changer, not too much. That's not a big expense when you consider, if for instance you were using a Tormach mill, that's a $4,500 option for them, but it's also more robust. So, just something to think about. Just so you know, there are other machines in the Stepcraft line that are different sizes. In fact, there's 3 sizes that are smaller than the 600, and there's one size that's larger. Now, they range in price from about $1,000 for the Stepcraft 210 machine, which is Stepcraft 1, it's first generation machine, on up to the biggest machine, the Stepcraft 2840, which goes for about $19.99. So there's quite a few different sizes available of the machine. Well, I hope that has been helpful to anybody who was wondering about the Stepcraft machines and, what my first impressions are of it. Just to be fair, I received this machine from Stepcraft to evaluate. So it is not, I'm not being paid in any way to do this, to build this machine and to use it. But, I did receive the machine for free to take a peek at it. And I'm going to tell you what I see that I like, and I'm also going to tell you what I see that I don't like or what I think they could do better. And, in that way, if this machine is something that you were interested in, at least you would have some firsthand information about it. So I hope you find that you will find this helpful, and I'll report back after I've completed the construction of the machine. I'll probably put up a YouTube video or two of the construction process, and show it cut something. I'm not really sure where this machine is going to fit into my workflow yet, and I won't know that until I've actually cut something with it and to see what it's capable of. But one thing that has intrigued me about the Stepcraft machines in general is all the accessories that are available to do different types of work, like a diamond drag cutter for making LED signs, or a foam cutting attachment for cutting styrofoam, or a laser attachment for doing some light laser engraving, things like that. Those are all add-ons that slip right into the end of this tool, because it's got a special tool holder that does quick release stuff. Anyway, I think that this would be a pretty cool machine to sit down and make some LED signs with, or cut carbon fiber for making quadcopters or whatever. I'm just not really sure where this is going to fit for me as far as what projects I would do in here with this machine versus which ones I would do on my larger machine. But it would be nice to have a machine inside of the home versus out in the workshop, which is unheated most of the winter. So it's going to be an interesting times. We'll see how this works. So if you'd like more information about Stepcraft and the machines that they have, you can go to stepcraft.us. That's stepcraft.us. And there's all sorts of information there. You can take a listen to episode 18, where we interviewed the founder, Eric Royer, on the show. I'm sure there's lots of information there. And I'll also have a list of other information in the show notes and on our resources page at cncroutertips.com/37. That's the URL to find this episode and the show notes for this episode. So that's cncroutertips.com/37. I have some closing thoughts for you right after this message.
Today's episode is sponsored by The Maker's Guide, creator of the Triple Edge Finder. Get the edge you need, save time and frustration on your CNC project, and make setup a snap. Save time and material. Set up your workpiece on your CNC router table faster than ever. Accurately set your Z-axis height first time, every time. Automatically locate the corner or edge of a workpiece. Reset your starting point in the middle of a program. Quality crafted right here in the USA on US-made CNC machines. Get the edge you need today. Go to www.themakersguide.com/edge. The Maker's Guide. Useful tools for makers.
As long as we're talking about new and exciting projects, I thought I'd tell you about this cool relay that I found. It's called the IoT Relay, and it is a little power strip that has a built-in, it's 4 sockets, and it has a built-in relay that can receive a signal to turn things off and on, like your vacuum or your coolant pump, or anything that you want turned off or on could go through this, and you could just send it a signal direct from UCCNC or Mach 3 or whatever software you had, even TinyG or any of those things, because it just takes a common voltage signal to change things. I've been experimenting with it for the last couple of weeks, and I'm going to do a quick video showing it and how I use it. But it's a pretty cool device, and I think you should check it out. So I'll put a link in the show notes for this episode. Or if you want just a quick peek at it, you can go to cncroutertips.com/relay, and that'll just have a quick link to it. I mean, you can get them on Amazon, so there's nothing unusual to find out about it. But I think that it would come in handy on a CNC project, or in any other number of ways around the workshop. So you should check them out. I often mention many different types of software during the episodes, and hardware and cutters, and it can get a little confusing. So what I did was I put together a page on my website, cncroutertips.com/resources. And on that page, I list all sorts of resources there, from books to tools to software, all the things that I use that make my CNC experience better and easier. And I hope you'll check it out. So again, it's cncroutertips.com/resources. And the last thing I would like to say is we could use some more question and answers from you, questions for our question and answer sessions from you, the listeners. Now, if you'd like to have your question featured on the air, here's how. Need help? Ask me about your CNC router question on my podcast, the CNC Router Tips Podcast. I'll be glad to help, or try and get you the help you need. I want this podcast to be a fun and personal experience for everyone, and helpful. So let's keep it real and ask sensible questions. Please use common sense and show courtesy to everyone. That way everybody wins. Here are some guidelines to ensure that your question is qualified to be featured on the show. Please keep your questions under 1 minute in length, If it goes a little over that, that's fine, but don't ramble. If you have a website and URL, you're allowed to share it, but only once during the recording. Spammy or disrespectful or deeply private questions will not be considered for the podcast. If you need to ask more than one question, just make each question a separate voicemail. Thanks, everyone, for listening to the CNC Router Tips podcast. Have a great day.